What would you do if your HOA decided that your land, the one you poured your blood, sweat, and tears into, was no longer yours? What if they told you they were taking it, not for a road or a school, but for a park you never asked for? I never thought I'd have to answer that question. My farm wasn't just land, it was my life, built from years of hard work, early mornings, and late nights. It was where I planned to grow old, where every tree, every fence, and every square inch of soil meant something to me. But that quiet, peaceful life I had carved out for myself shattered the moment a black SUV screeched to a halt in my driveway, kicking up clouds of dust in its wake. Even before the driver's door swung open, I had a bad feeling. The kind that settles in your gut and warns you that something is about to go terribly wrong. And when I saw her step out, Karen, the newly appointed HOA board member, I knew this wasn't a friendly visit. She moved with the confidence of someone who had already decided she was in charge. Wearing oversized sunglasses and an expression that could curdle milk, she exuded entitlement from head to toe. I stood from my chair on the porch, my body already tensing. Karen wasn't the kind of person you ignored. I took a slow step forward, forcing myself to stay calm. "You must be the new guy, right?" she said, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness. "I'm Karen, with the HOA. We need to talk." I forced a polite nod, but my gut twisted at the sound of those 3 letters, HOA. I had purposely kept my distance from them since moving here. I wasn't interested in neighborhood politics, especially when they were run by people like her. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, it's something very important," she said, looking past me, scanning my land as if she already owned it. "You see this farm? Well, we've decided it would be better suited for something a little more community-friendly." A cold knot of unease formed in my chest. "Community-friendly?" I repeated, already knowing I wasn't going to like what came next. Karen's smirk widened like she was enjoying every second of this. "The HOA has decided to convert this land into a shared park for the neighborhood. You'll be compensated, of course, but you won't have to worry about the hassle of maintaining it anymore. We'll take care of everything." At first, I thought I had misheard her. A park? My land? My home? There was no way in hell. "No," I said firmly, my voice edged with disbelief. "You don't get to just walk onto my property and claim it. This is my farm. I built this." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said, unfazed. "But the HOA has already voted. The decision is final. We're taking the land." I clenched my jaw so tight I could feel my teeth grinding together. My hands curled into fists at my sides, but I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't just about property. It was about everything I had worked for. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, voice steady but filled with unwavering resolve. Karen's smirk never faded. "Well, if you don't want to cooperate, we'll just have to go through the legal process. It'll be a shame, really, but we'll get what we want, one way or another." She turned on her heel and strode back to her SUV like she had already won. A moment later, the tires spun against the gravel, sending another cloud of dust into the air as she drove away. I stood there, heart pounding, fists clenched, staring at the empty spot where her car had been. My pulse roared in my ears. How the hell was this even possible? How could a board of strangers decide that my land, my home, was no longer mine? I pulled out my phone, ready to call my lawyer, but then I stopped. No. This wasn't just about legal contracts and paperwork. This was war. And Karen had no idea who she was messing with. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug expression, heard her condescending voice telling me that my land wasn't mine anymore. My farm, my home, was just another project for her and the HOA to bulldoze into their idea of community improvement. But no matter how many times I turned it over in my mind, the situation didn't make sense. The HOA couldn't just take private property. There were laws against that. Right? I needed answers. As soon as the sun crested the horizon, I was already on my way to town. My first stop was Mark Reynolds, the real estate agent who had helped me buy the farm. If anyone knew the legal status of my land, it was him. When I stormed into his office, he barely had time to sip his morning coffee before looking up at me in alarm. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting his mug down. I didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Karen from the HOA showed up yesterday," I said, barely keeping my voice level. "She told me they're taking my land for a community park." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "That's impossible," he said immediately. "Your land is legally protected. The HOA can't just take it. They'd need your permission or an official government seizure order, and that's not something an HOA has the power to do." "That's what I thought," I said, leaning forward. "But she made it sound like it was already a done deal. She even said they voted on it." Mark frowned, shaking his head. "Something's not right. Let me make a few calls. In the meantime, you should check with the county clerk. If there's been any movement on your land title, it'll be on record there." I was already halfway to the door before he finished his sentence. The county office was a small, aging building on Main Street, its walls lined with records older than the town itself. As I walked inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The back of my neck prickled, like someone was watching me. I turned quickly, scanning the room, but there was no one suspicious. Just clerks going about their business and a few townspeople waiting in line. I told myself I was being paranoid. I spotted Nancy Whitmore, the head clerk, and walked straight to her desk. She recognized me immediately and gave me a polite smile. "Nancy, I need to check the status of my land deed," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Something's going on with the HOA, and I need to know if they've filed anything against my property." Her expression turned serious as she typed into the system, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. She frowned, clicking through multiple pages, then suddenly stopped. "That's strange," she muttered. My stomach tightened. "What? What's strange?" She turned the screen slightly toward me. "There's a document here, a property transfer request, filed under your name. It says you agreed to transfer ownership of your land to the HOA for public development." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "My name? My signature?" Nancy scrolled down, then let out a sharp breath. "Ethan, this signature, it doesn't match your original deed signature. Someone forged this." A surge of rage shot through me so fast I could barely breathe. "Karen." I gripped the edge of her desk, trying to stay calm. "Can you print this for me? I need a copy." She nodded quickly, the printer spitting out the document a moment later. I grabbed it and stormed out of the building. This wasn't just Karen being overbearing, this was fraud. I called Mark as I marched toward my truck. "She forged my signature," I said the moment he picked up. "They filed a fake transfer request saying I agreed to give them my land." There was a beat of silence before he swore under his breath. "That's illegal as hell. You need to take that to a lawyer, immediately." "Already on my way," I muttered. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in David Lawson's office, my land documents spread across his desk. He was flipping through the pages, his jaw tightening with every word he read. "This isn't just forgery," he said, his voice sharp. "This is outright fraud. If this goes through, the HOA could try to claim legal ownership before you even get a chance to fight it." "What do I do?" I asked, my patience running thin. David leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "First, we file an immediate dispute with the county clerk to freeze any action on the document. Then, we file a legal challenge against the HOA for fraud. I clenched my fists. And Karen? David gave me a grim look. We'll deal with her. As I left his office, my phone buzzed. It was a message, from an unknown number. You should just take the deal. This won't end well for you. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need to guess. Karen wasn't just trying to take my land. She was threatening me. I tightened my grip on my phone. She had no idea what kind of fight she had just started. The next morning, I woke to something worse than an alarm clock. A sharp, relentless pounding on my front door. Still groggy, I stumbled out of bed, yanking it open, expecting to see a delivery driver or maybe Mark with an urgent update. Instead, my stomach twisted as my eyes landed on a bright red notice taped to the door. Notice of eviction. I ripped it down, my pulse spiking. My name was printed in bold letters beneath an official-looking county seal, along with the words, "Failure to comply with HOA regulations has resulted in the forfeiture of property." My land. My home. Before I could process it, my phone rang. Mark's name flashed across the screen. "You at your place?" His voice was sharp. "Yeah," I said, scanning the notice in disbelief. "What's going on?" "Get to the county office. Now." "That eviction notice, it's fake." I didn't wait for an explanation. I grabbed my keys and peeled out of my driveway, my tires spitting gravel. By the time I reached the county office, Nancy was already waiting for me, her face tight with concern. She snatched the paper from my hand and inspected it, muttering under her breath. "This isn't from us," she said, shaking her head. "This is a forgery." A cold rage settled in my chest. "Karen. We need to report this," Nancy said, already pulling up my records. "Legally, you are still the sole owner of your land. The HOA has no authority to evict you. But if they're willing to go this far, they're not going to stop here." She was right. This was a war, and Karen was playing dirty. I filed a formal complaint, but I knew paperwork alone wouldn't stop her. She wasn't just trying to steal my land, she was trying to break me. And she wasn't finished. That afternoon, I went back to the farm, trying to regain some sense of normalcy, but when I turned the faucet to wash my hands, nothing came out. I frowned, twisting the knob again. No water. I flipped the light switch. No power. My gut clenched as I grabbed my phone and called the utility company. After what felt like an eternity on hold, a monotone voice informed me that service had been disconnected per a request from the Homeowners Association. That was it. That was the final straw. Karen wasn't just threatening me, she was trying to force me out. No water. No electricity. No way to maintain the farm. I dialed David, my lawyer, barely keeping my voice even as I explained what had happened. They shut off my utilities. I didn't authorize this. There was a pause on the other end, then a slow exhale. That's illegal. He sounded almost impressed by how far Karen was willing to go. Can we fight it? I asked, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Absolutely. But it's going to take time. They know that, which is why they're trying to make life miserable for you in the meantime. Time was something I didn't have. I needed to hit back now. That night, I gathered everything I had, copies of the forged land transfer, the fake eviction notice, proof of my utility payments. I sent it all to every news station in town. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. The next morning, my phone was blowing up. Local reporters wanted interviews. People in the community were outraged. The story was everywhere. HOA uses fraud and bullying to steal farmers' land. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Karen called the cops on me. A sheriff's deputy pulled into my driveway before I even had time to drink my coffee. The moment I stepped outside, he held up a restraining order. "You've been accused of harassment and threats," he said, barely looking up from the paperwork. I let out a dry laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I don't know the full story, but you need to stay away from Karen and the HOA board for now. If this escalates, it could lead to criminal charges." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Karen wasn't just playing dirty. She was setting me up. She wanted me angry. She wanted me to snap so she could paint me as the bad guy. But she had underestimated me. I met the officer's gaze. "I'll follow the order, but this isn't over." After he left, I called David again. "She's trying to frame me now," I said, pacing my living room. "I know," he said grimly. "And I have a feeling she's not done yet." I didn't know how right he was until that night. At 3 a.m., I woke to a strange, rumbling noise outside my window. Groggy, I stumbled to the door, opened it, and my blood ran cold. Headlights. Bulldozers. I ran outside, shouting, as a construction crew was already tearing down my fence. I grabbed my phone, recording every second of it. The workers barely even looked at me. "We're under contract," one of them said. "HOA approved it." I was done playing defense. I called the cops, then sent the footage straight to the news. Within an hour, it was everywhere. By morning, the entire town had turned against Karen. She wanted to break me. But all she did was give me the ammunition to destroy her. By sunrise, my farm was a crime scene. The remains of my fence lay in splintered piles, my property line was exposed, and fresh tire tracks scarred the soil. The air still smelled of gasoline from the bulldozers that had slithered onto my land in the dead of night. But if Karen thought she had finally broken me, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The sheriff arrived first, stepping out of his cruiser with a look that told me he'd rather be anywhere else. He scratched the back of his neck as he surveyed the damage. "Got a report about some unauthorized construction," he muttered. "Unauthorized?" I scoffed, shoving my phone into his hands. "Try criminal trespassing and property destruction." I caught everything on camera. And the workers admitted, on video, that the HOA sent them. His eyes flicked over the footage, his jaw tightening. "This is bad," he admitted. "But I need to run it up the chain." "Run it up fast," I snapped. "Because I'm not waiting around for Karen to send in demolition crews next." He handed me back my phone, nodding. "I'll start the paperwork. But you need to be ready for a legal fight." Legal fights were exactly what Karen thrived on. And I had no doubt she was already spinning some version of the story where I was the villain. That's why I didn't go home after the cops left. I went straight to the local news station. The anchor recognized me instantly. "You're the farmer in the HOA scandal," she said, shaking my hand. "That's one way to put it," I replied. "I've got a story for you. And this time, I've got proof." I handed over the footage, the fake eviction notice, the forged documents, everything. She skimmed through the material, her face going pale. "This is bigger than just your farm," she murmured. "This is corruption on a whole other level." "Then expose it," I said simply. That night, my story led the 6 o'clock news. Footage of my torn-down fence, clips of the workers admitting they were hired by the HOA, documents proving fraud, all of it was out in the open. By the time the segment ended, the town had turned into a powder keg. The HOA office was flooded with calls. People stormed their meetings, demanding answers. The town's Facebook page exploded with comments, "This could happen to any of us. Karen needs to go. HOA overreach has gone too far." But Karen, ever the snake, refused to admit defeat. The next morning, a black luxury car pulled into my driveway. This time, she didn't even bother pretending to be polite. She stepped out, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "Morning," she sneered. "I see you've been busy stirring up trouble. You bulldozed my fence at 3 in the morning," I shot back. "You forged my signature. You shut off my utilities. And you expect me to stay quiet?" She smirked, unfazed. "The HOA is moving forward with this, whether you like it or not. You're just prolonging the inevitable." I took a slow step closer, lowering my voice. "And I think you're underestimating just how much damage I can do to your reputation." Her eyes flickered, but she recovered quickly. "This will go to court," she warned. "Good," I said, stepping back. "Because I can't wait to see you explain fraud and trespassing under oath." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, but before she could answer, a car pulled up behind hers. Mark stepped out first, then David, my lawyer, right behind him. And they weren't alone. 2 men in suits followed, representatives from the town's legal counsel. Karen paled slightly. David took his place beside me, his voice calm but firm. "We have a formal cease and desist order against the HOA regarding any further attempts to seize this property. And the town's legal team has opened an investigation into your actions." Mark folded his arms. "Looks like this isn't going to be as easy as you thought, Karen." For the first time since this nightmare began, Karen didn't have a response. She turned sharply, walking back to her car. I watched as she drove off, her tires kicking up dust. This wasn't over yet. But for the first time, she was on the defensive. The next morning, I woke up knowing that today would be the day everything changed. After weeks of fighting, exposing Karen's corruption, and rallying the town against her, it was time for the final battle. The HOA had called for an official meeting, and for once, they weren't the ones in control. I arrived at the HOA office dressed like I was heading to war, clean-cut, composed, with a folder of documents under my arm that could sink their entire organization. Karen was already inside, seated at the long table with a few other board members who now looked far less confident than before. She didn't smirk this time. She barely looked at me. The moment the meeting started, David, my lawyer, laid everything out. He presented evidence of the forged documents, the fake eviction notice, the illegal utility shutoff, and the destruction of my property. He detailed how Karen had orchestrated the entire scheme, using intimidation and fraud to push me off my land. And just when the room couldn't get any tenser, Mark revealed that the town's legal counsel was officially investigating the HOA for misconduct. The board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. One of them finally spoke up, looking anywhere but at Karen. "Given the nature of these allegations, we believe it's best to withdraw the land proposal and settle this matter privately." David nodded, already prepared. "That won't be enough. Mr. Carter will be filing a civil suit for damages, and we're requesting an official apology from the HOA for their illegal actions." Karen finally snapped. "You can't do this," she hissed, slamming her hands on the table. "The HOA makes the rules, not some nobody farmer who doesn't understand how things work." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "And you just learned that those rules don't put you above the law." Silence fell over the room. The board members were done defending her. One by one, they agreed to withdraw the claim, issue a public apology, and remove Karen from her position. She was finished. By the time I left the building, the news had already spread. The town buzzed with the fallout. Karen's name was everywhere, but not in the way she wanted. By evening, she had officially resigned, and the HOA had sent out a carefully worded letter apologizing for mismanagement. But it didn't matter. Everyone knew the truth. That night, I stood at the edge of my farm, looking out at the land I had fought so hard to keep. I had won, not just for myself, but for every homeowner who had ever been bullied by a corrupt HOA. But the real question is, how many other people out there have been through the same nightmare? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.